I've lost my place in my Bible. I turned to Matthew. And we will go to Matthew sometime in the sermon this morning, but not at this moment. Good to be in the house of the Lord, is it not? All right. Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4. So when will we exit Galatians chapter 4? Well, oddly enough, it'll be to this day. Chapter 4, verse 21 through 31. Galatians chapter 4. Tell me, you who wish to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born to the promise. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing her children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the child of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of the promise. But just as at the time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him, who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. But what does Scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. What we got going on here? Well, let's take another sip of water. What we have going on here? We've been talking over the last couple of weeks how Paul has been making the case that if you wish to live by law, if you wish to live by legalism, that you are imprisoning, you are self-imprisoning yourself and shackling yourself to a false doctrine. And the Judaizers have been coming back with some counter-arguments, and the new counter-argument is, but we are children of the promise to Abraham. We are Abraham's descendants, and therefore, as Abraham's descendants, we are children of the promise. And as we've noticed, if you go to Genesis chapter 17, in Genesis chapter 17, God promises to Abraham that He will give him an offspring. And in chapter 3 of Galatians, Paul tells us who the offspring is. And for centuries and millennia, the Jews believed that the offspring was Isaac. Paul tells us in Galatians chapter 3 that the offspring is Christ. And so has now changed that relationship. And so now we see here the Judaizers come back and say, but we are descendants of Abraham. And the reason why they do this is because still within this legalistic or law mindset is this concept that what Paul is teaching is cheap grace. See, if salvation comes by faith alone and there's no work involved, then it's cheap. You didn't do anything for it. You didn't earn it. How can you prove that you meant it? It's cheap. It's kind of like when folks go, it's hard to believe that Adolf Hitler, as evil as he could be, in the last few seconds of his life, before he took his own life, if he had accepted Jesus Christ, would God let him into heaven? That's cheap grace. See, look at the vile things this man did in all of Europe, to the Jews, to the Gypsies, to the Poles, to the Czechs, to the Italians, to everywhere he went, to Britain when he had it leveled. We're darn well tried. And then in the last seconds, he decided to convert to Christianity. And now he gets out of jail free. That's cheap grace. He didn't fix anything. And see, we get that in our head. And we go, but no, there's got to be something we do. And the Judaizers have making this counter-argument. Paul is teaching cheap grace and is trying to invalidate who is the people of God with this cheap grace that he keeps trying to peddle. But notice what Paul says. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law itself? Now he shifts from being mild in his speech, as we noticed last week, where he called them brothers, but now has switched to an even more tertiary tone. Tell me, you, and it has a lot more emphasis to it, who desire to be under the law. Why is it do you still want to be under this law system? Well, because, according to the Jews, they're descendants of Abraham. They're descendants of the promise. And look what Paul does. For it is written that Abraham had two sons. Now they would go, yes, he did. One by a slave woman, and one by a free woman. Yes, that's true, Paul. The son of the slave woman was born according to the flesh. And a lot of people really get wrapped around the axle. This is what it means. Through the natural relations of Abraham and Hagar, along comes Ishmael. Remember, Sarah's womb is closed. God has closed that womb. And God opens it after the visitors of chapter 18 come to visit Abraham. Chapter 18 is also when, or 17 is when Abraham receives the promise that he will be the father of many nations and an offspring will come from him. See, Sarah's conception is miraculous in the fact that she is beyond childbearing age. So what is done in Sarah, and the offspring that comes from Sarah, comes out of a miraculous event according to a promise God makes to Abraham. And the offspring isn't Isaac. Go read Galatians chapter 3. It's Christ. Now, if you were a Jew and you just heard that, it will rock your world utterly. Well, the free woman was born through the promise. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. Another way to translate that, F.F. Bruce, a great, he's passed on now, New Testament scholar, this may be taken more as a spiritual object lesson. Doesn't really truly fit the concept of allegory in its more defined stance. You want to use the word, use the word. These two women are two covenants. One from Mount Sinai, bearing children of slavery. Jews are like going, yep, tracking 100%. She is Hagar. Now, Hagar means Mount Sinai in Arabia. That would be the direct translation. Now, check what Paul does. Watch what he does. She corresponds to present what? Jerusalem. For she is in slavery with her children. You want to live by the law? You're in slavery. You want to live by the law? You correspond to the slave woman and part of the covenant made with Hagar. You want to live according to the law? Paul has already told you that it makes you a prisoner, that it treats you like a child, that it treats you like an infant, that it treats you like an individual who gladly throws the shackles back on and gets in. But here, hold on, you want to pull natural birth? What makes a believer in God? What makes a member of the body of Christ? What makes a member of the body of God? Is it natural birth? Is it wealth? Is it money? Is it good deeds? No. Your natural birth doesn't work anymore. Why? Because you, who choose to live that way, are now children of the slave woman, which corresponds to current Jerusalem. That's hard. And that's a hard pill for the Judaizers to take, because for all their time they've been taught we're the people of God. Folks, there's been one people of God, there's been one method of salvation, there's been one means of atonement. You say, I don't believe so. Well, okay. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. I will not read for you all of chapter 11, but I will read for you all the sections that say by faith. Starting with verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by or of God. Notice it didn't say by law here. So here's the thing. You want to argue with atheists, you want to argue with individuals that aren't Christians about how the earth came into existence. Folks, Paul's telling you right here that unless they understand or are people of faith, they have no real ability to comprehend whether the day-age view or the 7 literal day view of creation won, because they don't understand the God that made it. Verse 4, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. Not by law, by faith. By faith, verse 5, Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. Verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please Him. For whoever would draw near to God, now this is written about Old Testament guys. By faith it is impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe He exists and that He rewards those who seek. Notice it didn't say by law there. By faith, Noah, being warned of God concerning events yet unseen. Verse drop down a little bit further. By faith, this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteous that comes by law. It's because Noah's in the lineage that creates the Jews. By law? Nope. That comes by faith. Verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. By faith he went. By faith Sarah received powers to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered himself faithful who had promised. These all died in law, in faith. Verse 16. But as they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tested to offer up Isaac. Verse 20. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the Exodus. Well, yeah, but all these guys were before the law, Pastor. All these guys were before the law. Oh, okay. You want to go that route? 23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh. By faith, he left Egypt. By faith, they kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea. By faith, the walls of Jericho came falling down. By the way, the walls of Jericho happens after or before the law comes? After. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish. What more shall we say of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, becoming mighty in war, putting foreign armies to flight. Keep going. Verse 39, all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that is apart from us, that they should not be made perfect. You want to live by law? You want to claim national descent? You want to claim that I am a child of the promise? Paul just says you can't. If you wish to live by the law, you are now under the covenant of the slave woman. Why? Go to Hebrews chapter 11 and look. From the beginning, it's always been by faith. Always been by faith. And Paul tells us why the law comes. It comes to demonstrate you are incapable in your own ability to maintain a relationship with God based upon your goodness. But it's cheap grace. It's cheap grace, is it? Let's look at Matthew chapter 20 at this cheap grace argument. For the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarii for the day, he sent them into the vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I'll give you." So they went. And again, going out about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And at about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" I ask that same question all the time driving through cities. Anyhow, there's a side note. See that rabbit just pop its head right up? Pow! And now I've lost my place. Idle all day. There it is. They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." So he said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." And those hired about the 11th hour, each of them received a denarii. Now when those who had been hired first, they thought they would receive much more. But each of them also received a denarii. And on receiving it, they grumbled at their master, saying, "These last worked 1 hour." That's a great deal if you were the guy last, right? It's kind of like the motto, if you wait till the last minute to do something, it only takes a minute to do something. "These last worked only an hour. And you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden all day and the scorching heat." See, God's a capitalist right here. But he replied to them, "Friend, am I doing you wrong? Did you not agree with me for 1 denarii? Take what belongs to you and go." Take what belongs to you and go. "I choose to give to this last worker as I choose to give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity so that the last will be first and the first will be last?" Do you begrudge God's generosity in this passage because he decides or just saves individuals who might have escaped the fire last minute or have not put in as much time in grade or much time in the field? See, cheap grace is the argument, but look at what Jesus says. Look, it's not cheap grace. Though you might have been saved at a younger age, or you might have had to come out of the law, or that you might have had to be part of the children of promise, but now salvation comes, and while you have had kept the law all your life, it doesn't bring you salvation, and these individuals have it. Does it mean that it's cheap grace, or does it mean that God is merciful and kind and benevolent to those? See, the cheap grace argument is we've been longer than those over there. And Jesus says that doesn't matter. Nor should it matter. Nor should it matter in the argumentation that if Adolf Hitler accepted Jesus Christ in the last few seconds of his life before he killed himself, which would be oxymoronic in itself, but let's just use that for an argumentation of itself. You like that? That was pretty cool, wasn't it? It doesn't mean that the grace of God was cheap. We use that as a counter-argument, trying to say, well, God's grace is so cheap because then I can live as I want. And then right at the end, accept salvation. That's kind of like the argument, I'm going to get in an elevator, and when it starts to collapse, I'm going to wait till it's 1 foot off the floor and take a jump up. Well, first of all, you have to understand that when you're a foot from the floor, so you can jump up, and since the floor is not translucent, you're going to have a hard time with that. You don't know when your life will end, and so you can't say, well, I'll wait till I'm on my deathbed, and then I'll accept Jesus Christ. Why? Because your death may come before you're old and on your deathbed. And so it is not cheap grace that God decides to give His grace and His salvific work alone to redeem individuals who cannot do it themselves. Nor does it mean that because you were born of a certain nationality, you get a pass. And everyone else must join and take on your laws so that they can be saved. They must not come and get circumcised and observe the dietary laws of a tradition which is legalistic and denies the effective work of Christ just so you can be saved. That's the Judaizer argument. Paul teaches cheap grace. We teach the truth because we are Jews. And she must follow what the Jews have always followed in order to be saved. And Paul says that's a false gospel. Well, then who are the people of the promise? But Jerusalem above, she is free. She is our mother. Our mother. For it is written, rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth with a loud cry, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those who are of the one who is of. The children of the desolate one, the one whose womb has been closed, will be far more extant than the children of the slave. Notice the promise in Genesis chapter 17 says, not a nation will come from you, but nations, plural, will come from you. Paul sees this verse as a definite understanding of the situation between Hagar and Sarah and the demonstration that nations come from them. Now you, brothers, that'd be the Galatian Gentiles and also the Judaizers that accept Christianity by faith alone, not the ones that want to go back to law, but the Galatian Gentiles who by faith alone are saved. You, brothers, like who? Isaac, are children of the promise. What? But just as at the time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him, who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now. Just like when the child born to the slave woman persecuted Isaac and Sarah said, hey, Abraham, I love you, but you're going to get rid of her, right? Because when mama says it's going, right? Remember when you were single guys and you had that cool, like, wagon wheel table and those really cool things that you thought were like the boss and you had the best furniture ever, and then you met your wife and she walked in and you said, yeah, I'm going to put this in the living room. She went, oh, you were planning on putting that in the living room? Yeah. In the living room. Yeah. And you hadn't quite picked up on woman yet. In the living room? And then a couple weeks later you found it at the curb because you took it there? Sarah says she got to go, so she went. Just as in that day, when the child of the slave woman persecuted the free woman's child, so too the Judaizers, children of the slave woman, are persecuting children of the promise. And what does the text say happens to them? Very interesting. It doesn't say live in community with each other. What does Scripture say? There's a great quote from from verse 30. Cast out the slave woman and her son. For the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. Cast them out. Persecution comes from the legalistic mindset. Persecution comes from the Judaizer mindset. Persecution comes from the sacerdotal mindset. Persecution comes from the universalist mindset. Because how can you be so narrow-minded? Get on Facebook and declare your faith openly or take a very strict moral position and find out how quickly you are the target being called bigoted. Children of the slave Children who are of a legalistic mindset are not there for your purpose. Notice that's what Paul said last week. They don't seek you out for your good. They seek you out for their good. And their purpose is to bring you under something other than Jesus Christ. Their purpose is to enslave you. Cast them out. Throw them away. Like the furniture you thought when you were single was the bomb and a week later was on the curb. Be gone with it. Because they will not inherit with the free. Paul is adamant in his grammar here. He's not equivocating in his grammar here. This isn't, kind of, sort of. This is almost as a directive. Throw her away and her children. Because the descendants of Isaac, brothers and sisters, are the children of the promise, who is through Sarah, who is Jerusalem of above, not Jerusalem current. And it's hard for the Jew to hear. But what Paul just said was your hope in Abraham, your hope in Moses, your hope in the law, your hope in your natural birth, your hope in all those things are in vain because your hope is not grounded in the sinless work of Jesus Christ alone. Period. What makes you a member of the people of God is the work of Christ alone. Period. You say, what's cheap grace? Folks, grace is unmerited favor. None of us deserve it. None of us deserve it. And for us to look and say, well, my sins aren't as bad. Have you ever noticed that the gossip almost always says, well, I'm not a liar, or I'm not a murderer? When the liar goes, well, I give at work. I do charitable projects. Have you ever noticed that we always seem to magnify the good things we do while downplaying the junk we know we shouldn't do? And we have the gall to look at Christ and Paul and say, this is cheap grace because I'm better. You're a gossip, you're a liar, you're a murderer, you're a cheat. Why? Because Jesus says you look at someone and commit unless you've committed adultery. You're an adulterer. Well, I didn't actually sleep with her. It doesn't matter. You've done it in your mind. Call someone a fool. You're a murderer. Well, I didn't actually stab him in the throat. Doesn't matter. We put those distinctions on. We use a sliding scale. And then we look at the situation where God comes and brings His grace and go, but I'm better because I've worked all day in the sun. And Hitler only did it for the last 30 seconds. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is that an innocent man, the God-man, takes your place at your execution and is executed for your crime, regardless of how small it is. You want to play the fairness argument all day long? That's unfair. That's a travesty of justice done so that you can have a right relationship by grace alone, through faith alone. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. It's not by natural birth. It's not by national descent. It's not by wealth. It's not by money, deeds, works. It's not being a Unitarian. I go to heaven because I die. It's not by legalism. I go to heaven because I've checked all the blocks. Sacerdotalism. I go to heaven because I said a prayer. I've taken communion. I attended church. I did. These things do not save an individual. These things do not make a person a member of the people of God. These things merely hide the truth as to what we are, and that is wretches before a holy God. What saves? The work of Christ, extended to you through grace, by faith, revealed to us through the Scriptures. That's what saves. Your works are insufficient. Christ's works are all sufficient. Legalism designed to show you and to make you puffed up. Grace exposes the wretches we are, but provides for us a means to obtain freedom and restoration to God the Father. If you're here today and you have tried to live a life by being good enough, worthy enough, unsure enough, as the praise band comes to sing, I would like to introduce you to Jesus Christ, who is capable of delivering you in spite of you, so that you can live a relationship rightly before God and have the security of knowledge to know that it's not by your deeds, but by His perfect sacrifice. As the praise band sings, if you will come.